and turn to the book of Genesis. Genesis 27. We're working our way through probably 2 more weeks in Genesis, and then we'll be moving to our Christmas series. But before we go that route, I've always been fascinated with this passage. There's some interesting things that we're going to see here in Genesis 27, but what comes to mind when you think of the ideal family? You know, Libby, she's going to throw a picture, right? This ideal, perfect family where all the kids sit at the table and they're perfectly mannered and, you know, they say please and thank you the entire time. And we quickly realize none of this ever happens, right? None of this is the case in our family as well. One kid we're telling to eat, one kid's poking the other one, and, you know, it's how life goes. There is no ideal family, even though we'd like to think there is. You know, there's times the kids argue. There's times mom's starting to lose her mind, and there's times that dad doesn't think any hair is ever going to grow back. And so, you know, this is where we're at. Well, Genesis 27, we come to this passage and we quickly realize we are not the only ones who struggle with this. There were less than ideal families in the Bible, and we're going to get a taste of one today. Isaac, Rebekah, Esau, Jacob were not an ideal family. In fact, I would even call them a very dysfunctional family, and we'll see more as we dive in here, but I believe we can still learn many practical lessons from this important family in the Scriptures. So let's dive in. Let's look first at verses 1 through 4 in Genesis 27. Isaac's disobedience is a result of poor spiritual leadership. Notes are there in your bulletin as well for you to follow along with, and some questions at the end. So let's read verse 1. It says, "When Isaac was old and his eyes were dim, so that he could not see, he called Esau, his older son, and said to him, 'My son.' And he answered, 'Here I am.' He said, 'Behold, I am old. I do not know the day of my death. Now then, take your weapons, your quiver, and your bow, and go out to the field and hunt game for me, and prepare for me a delicious food, such as I love, and bring it to me so that I may eat, that my soul may bless you before I die.'" So here is what we have going on. Isaac, again, some of these chronological events throughout Genesis aren't happening in order, and we get a taste. Remember last week we jumped backwards, and now we're jumping to the relative future. Isaac is older. We find that he's probably, if not blind, close to it. He's possibly sickly. He knows he's going to die soon, and he wants to, just like his father, give that blessing, that covenant promise to his eldest son. Now, there's some issues here, and we're going to look at them here in just a minute. But Isaac was wrongfully motivated to give Esau this blessing. You see, here are a few reasons why. Because he wanted to give the blessing, not because of the promise that went along with it, but we see here, Isaac is motivated by his stomach. He wants to give Isaac the blessing because he knows, or Esau the blessing because he knows Esau's a good hunter. He must like the meat that Esau gives him, and he was wrongfully showing favoritism to this son. He also is wrongfully motivated by disobedience. You see, Isaac and Rebekah would have shared the promise back in Genesis 25 that God had made to Rebekah and said, the younger shall serve, or the older shall serve the younger. You see, Jacob was the one who would receive this promise. Now, there's going to be some issues there as well, and we'll get to those here in a minute. But you see, Isaac is openly rejecting that promise by God to Rebekah. He's saying, no, I'm still going to give it to Esau, which was the custom. And then we find here that Isaac is not the spiritual leader his father was to him. You see, think about Abraham's actions in his later years. We find a man who had a very up and down journey of faith, a very up and down spiritual journey, but we find towards the end of his life, he became the spiritual leader he should have been. He honored the Lord. He found a wife for his son. He made sure that there was no issues. He didn't want his son to have someone from a godless nation. He made sure that it was a person who was of the like faith. Well, Isaac is doing the exact opposite in his older age. He's not the spiritual leader he should be. I like to think of it like this. Olivia's going to throw a picture up there. Now, we've all probably seen this picture on our full and empty gas in the car. Those who just got their permits recently will probably see this soon. If you let it get down too far, this little light comes up. And if you don't fill up your tank, it's going to result in a very tough phone call to your dad usually. So I like to think of it like this. You see, all these warnings are right in front of Isaac's face. Yet he still decides to let the tank go empty. He still decides not to do the right thing. He still decides not to spiritually lead his family at this crucial time. He has maybe years, maybe days, maybe months left. He decides not to take the warning. He's ignoring the warning signs that God has given him in his life. Now we're going to see that there's more to this dysfunctional family than just the dad's lack of spiritual leadership. So look at verse 5. Rebekah, her deception is a result of poor communication. Now look at verse 5, and we'll read through verse 13. You're going to get a picture here of what's going on. Now Rebekah was listening when Isaac spoke to his son Esau. So when Esau went to the field to hunt for game and bring it, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, I have heard your father speak to your brother Esau. Bring me game and prepare for me delicious food, that I may eat it and bless you before the Lord before I die. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice as I command you. Go to the flock and bring me 2 good young goats, so that I may prepare from them delicious food for your father, such as he loves. And you shall bring it to your father to eat, so that he may bless you before he dies. But Jacob said to Rebekah, his mother, Behold, my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I am a smooth man. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I shall seem to be mocking him and bring a curse upon myself and not the blessing. His mother said to him, Let your curse be on me, my son, only obey my voice, and go bring it to me. Fascinating little encounter. But we find quickly there's a clear lack of communication with Rebekah and Isaac. There's a breakdown here. And traditionally, in this culture, the wives were not allowed to be part of that ceremonial blessing that a father would give a son. They weren't supposed to be in that presence, although we find they can obviously listen in and find out what's going on. But this was just the custom of the day. But we find Rebekah, she knew what God had promised to her. But what's the issue? There's disobedience happening because instead of just saying, God, this is in your hands. I know you can take care of this. You have promised to bless Jacob. What's she do? She takes it into her own hands, and she comes up with this plan to deceive Isaac and get Jacob the blessing that God had promised her. She was not trusting God, and instead she tells her son to lie, to deceive Isaac. There's a clear breakdown here in the family unit. There are problems going on at the top with Isaac and Rebekah, and most noticeably, this communication issue keeps coming up in this passage. It's kind of like a glimpse of a real TV sitcom, if you will. The parents aren't talking. The kids are doing their own thing. One's clearly a hunter. He's a dominant child. He wants what he wants. The other, Jacob, isn't a really good hunter, not probably an outdoors type person, but is clever, is deceptive, wants to get the best over his brother. all these things we see in our own lives, in our own families, and yet there's no communication happening. One conversation probably could have taken care of a lot of this. So I think it's important we're reminded. And we're not going to read Ephesians 4:25 through 32 or James 1:19, though I listed them in your bulletin for you to read later. But again, I talk about these often. There's some key communication issues that if they had followed, I believe it could have taken care of the issue. Be honest. Keep current. Attack problems, not people. Act, don't react, and listen attentively. And I look at that list and I say, what could have Jacob and Esau or Rebekah or Isaac done better to communicate in this situation or in this predicament that they're in? And then I look at my own life and I ask, and I believe we should all ask, how can we be better communicators in our own lives? How can we focus on some of these things to become better communicators with others? And I believe that would solve a lot of problems we face with others in relational conflicts. Next, it doesn't end with Isaac and Rebekah. Look at verses 14 through 20. Jacob's lie is a result of not trusting God. And before I say this, and before we read this, notice Jacob does not have to go along with Rebekah's scheme. He does not have to lie, but he chooses to. So let's read this. Start in verse 14. So he went and took them and brought them to his mother, and his mother prepared delicious food, such as his father loved. Then Rebekah took the best garments of Esau, her older son, which were with her in the house, and put them on Jacob, her younger son. And the skins of the young goats she put on his hands and on the smooth part of his neck. And she put the delicious food and the bread, which she had prepared, into the hands of her son Jacob. So he went in to his father and said, "My father." He said, "Here I am." "Who are you, my son?" Jacob said to his father, "I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Now sit up and eat of my game, that your soul may bless me." As Isaac said to his son, "How is it that you have found it so quickly, my son?" He answered, "Because the Lord, your God, granted me success." Notice Jacob's lie here. He went along with it, and we find he's clever. He knows what he's doing. He's being deceptive. He knows that what his father likes about Esau, and more importantly, he probably knows what his father doesn't like about him. So he goes along with the plan. He lies to Isaac. Now, lying is something the Bible talks a lot about. And it doesn't talk about it in a very good way. We often think, yes, lying, being deceptive is wrong, but what about those white lies? What about those little lies that are said in joking? Are they really harmless? Well, I come back to Proverbs 12:22. Lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but those who act faithfully are his delight. You see, the Bible never sees lying in a humorous way. It never commends it. Lying is always wrong when it comes to the Scriptures, to the way God views it. He hates lying. It is an abomination to him. Therefore, what's the opposite of lying? Well, we should be truth speakers. We should be those who speak the truth. And whose truth should we speak? John 14:6, Jesus said to him, "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." You see, God must be our standard for how we speak, for how we live, for what we do. God is always the perfect standard that we should be looking to, and we find it right here in the Scriptures we hold dear. We find it right here in the Bible. There's truth here that we can apply to our lives, and we should measure everything up to it. Now, granted, does the Bible talk about every single subject that we find in our culture today? Yes and no. No, the Bible doesn't talk about a computer or a cell phone, but it does talk about your conscience. It does talk about the decisions we make, and it still serves as general principles for truth that we can apply to our daily life, and I believe it is worth it. Next, Jacob's blessing is a result of the sovereignty of God. Verses 21 through 29. Then Isaac said to Jacob, "Please come near that I may feel you, my son, to know whether you are really my son Esau or not." So Jacob went near to Isaac his father, who left him and said, "The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau." And he did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands. So he blessed him. He said, "Are you really my son Esau?" Jacob has another chance. But he answered, "I am." Then he said, "Bring it near to me that I may eat of my son's game and bless you." So he brought it near to him, and he ate, and he brought him wine, and he drank. Then his father Isaac said to him, "Come near and kiss me, my son." So he came near and kissed him. And Isaac smelled the smell of his garments and blessed him and said, "See, the smell of my son is as the smell of the field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you of the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth and the plenty of grain and wine. Let peoples serve you and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you." Jacob deceives his father, yet he still receives the blessing of the covenant promise. Abraham did the same thing with Isaac, worded a little different, but he gave this same kind of covenant blessing to his son as well. And here's the aspects of this blessing. Jacob is going to have agricultural prosperity. He's going to have international respect and success. He's going to be the master over the entire people group that is there. He's now their leader. Isaac is handing over the reins. You're in charge, Jacob. And then he's going to be given this blessing and cursing promise that God made to Abraham so long ago. Though Isaac did not know it was Jacob, he was fulfilling God's words back in Genesis 25. You see, even though it didn't go about the way it probably should have, we still find that God is keeping his promise in blessing Jacob and not Esau. Now, that doesn't justify Jacob's lying, and he'll pay for that. He will be judged for those things, and it's going to be a rough life for a while for Jacob. But God providentially uses all kinds of human choices or actions, good and bad, to carry out his promised purposes. You see, God uses every situation for the people's good, our good. It goes back to Romans 8:28. I talked about that passage last week. You see, every situation we're brought into, everything that happens to us, God uses to transform us, to sanctify us. He uses those situations, sometimes even bad, what we would say, very bad situations, to make us more like Christ on the other end. You see, God uses all those things to accomplish what he has set out to do. God is sovereignly at work in our lives, even when we don't realize it. God is sovereignly at work. Last, let's look at verses 30 through 46. It's a little lengthy, but here's where Esau comes in. Esau's response is a result of the family's disobedience to God. Notice this about Esau. Starting in verse 30. As soon as Isaac had finished the blessing, when Jacob had scarcely gone out from the presence of Isaac his father, Esau, his brother, came in from his hunting. He also prepared delicious food and brought it to his father. And he said to his father, "Let my father arise and eat of his son's game, that you may bless me." His father Isaac said to him, "Who are you?" He answered, "I'm your son, your firstborn, Esau." Then Isaac trembled very violently and said, Who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me, and I ate it all before you came, and I have blessed him? Yes, and he shall be blessed." As soon as Esau heard the words of his father, he cried out with an exceedingly great and bitter cry, and said to his father, "Bless me, even me also, O my father." But he said, "Your brother came deceitfully, and he has taken away your blessing." Esau said, "Is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has cheated me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and behold, now he has taken away my blessing." Then he said, "Have you not reserved a blessing for me?" Isaac answered and said to Esau, "Behold, I have made him lord over you, and all his brothers I have given to him for servants, and with grain and wine I have sustained him. What then can I do for you, my son?" Esau said to his father, "Have you but one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, O my father." And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. Then Isaac his father answered and said, "Behold, away from the fatness of the earth shall your dwelling be, and away from the dew of heaven on high. By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. But when you grow restless, and you shall break his yoke from your neck." Now Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, "The days of mourning for my father are approaching. Then I will kill my brother Jacob." But the words of Esau, the oldest son, were told to Rebekah. So she sent and called Jacob, her younger son, and said to him, "Behold, your brother Esau comforts himself by knowing or by planning to kill you. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice. Arise, flee to Laban, my brother, in Haran, and stay with him a while until your brother's fury turns away, until your brother's anger turns away from you, and he forgets what you have done to him. Then I will send and bring you from here. Why should I be of you both in one day?" Then Rebekah said to Isaac, "I loathe my life because of the Hittite woman. If Jacob marries one of the Hittite women like these, one of the women of the land, what good will my life be to me?" Longer passage, I know, but it kind of seals this family dysfunction that we're seeing here. This is a very messed up family, and we find Rebekah and Jacob's deception doesn't go without consequences. There are some serious consequences. Isaac's furious. Esau's furious, even to the point that he wants to kill Jacob. His anger has turned to mourning. His mourning has turned back to anger. He's very upset to the point that he has lost out on everything that he thought would be promised to him. As a result, Jacob is sent away, and we find out later he's sent away for 20 years, and then he never sees Rebekah again alive. See, Rebekah dies before Jacob returns, and it's a very sad ending to a dysfunctional, very troubled family. Now, verse 46 is a transitional verse. It's setting the stage for this focus to change from Isaac to Jacob. But notice, all of this could have been taken care of if Isaac was the spiritual leader he should have been. See, it starts at the top. Isaac messed up. His wife, Rebekah, messed up. And then we see dysfunction in the families as well with the kids. And we recognize sin always has consequences. Sin always has consequences. Now, maybe they're immediate, but maybe they take some time. But sin always has consequences. And that's why I always stress we must confess them. We must repent of them. And we must change to glorify God with our lives. Now, as we look over this passage, I believe there's 5 things we need to take away this week. First is this. Livy's going to throw them up on the screen. Spiritual leadership in the home is essential to obeying God. We must be spiritually leading others in our home. We must be practicing those spiritual disciplines in our life that point us more to the Scriptures, point us more to God, whether it's prayer, Bible reading, there's so many more, but are we practicing those spiritual disciplines that we should be? Communication in the home is essential to good relationships. We must communicate. Now, sometimes that's easier than others, but we find even in this passage, things get really bad when we don't communicate with one another. Third, trusting God to do what He says He will do is essential to living day by day for Jesus. See, God's promises is what should fuel us every day as we live this life. We must trust that God is going to fulfill His promises in our lives no matter what we encounter, no matter what. Fourth, the sovereignty of God is a comfort to those who rest in it. See, knowing that God is sovereignly over all things is a comfort to all our souls this morning. We know we serve someone bigger and better than ourselves, and He has it under control. And then last, your obedience or disobedience to God is leaving a mark on your family or others. You see, our spirituality, our spiritual journey doesn't affect just us. Yes, it is a personal one, but it also is demonstrated to others. You see, people don't always see what we're thinking or what we say, but what they do see is our actions. And we see that here in this passage. Isaac ignored God's words. He ignored God's promises, and we see the results. His family was messed up. His family was a mess. Now, before we look down on this family, we must realize that we're not all perfect. As I said before, we have challenges. We have issues. One child normally has to eat by herself because she's not eating when we tell her to, and everyone else finishes. One child is probably screaming. The list goes on. We have issues. And before we cast judgment on Isaac and Rebekah and Jacob and Esau, we must realize we all struggle with different things. We all have problems, and most importantly, we all need Jesus. We need more of His grace in our lives. We need more realizing that when we are weak, He is strong. We need more of Christ in the day-to-day moments of our lives, but in order to get that, we must fill our minds with what He's given us, and what He's given us is His Word. We must fill our minds with the Scriptures and be rested with this promise this week. Proverbs 30, verse 5. Every, not some, not a little bit, but every word of God proves true. He is a shield to those who take refuge in Him. Even though things may get hard this week, you think, why is my family a mess? Or why is this happening? Why is that happening? This kid's getting sick, or that kid's, doing whatever. One kid's falling down the stairs, whatever it may be. Rest assured, God has it under control. God is our shield when we take refuge in Him. Let us pray. Father, thank You this morning that we can have hope, that we can have assurances that even though this life may spin out of control sometimes in our own minds, we know that You are a God who is sovereign over it. You are a God who has it in control. Please help us to stop trying to take our own paths in this or to have control over these situations, but to trust You and know that You have it under control and that You are leading us into these moments for Your purposes. And in Your name I pray. Amen. Please stand with me.